Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to What's the Point, a podcast that helps you clarify, discover, and live your purpose. I have an incredible guest today, Brian Ahearn. How are you, sir?
I am doing wonderful, Bill. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, and thank you, as I just mentioned off camera, thank you for the commitment of your time. I know it's very valuable, as it is for all of us, but I know that you're very busy. And I know that I'll want to talk for hours, and we can't. So let's get right to that. Let me share with the listeners a little bit more about you, Brian. The recent numbers came out that there are now estimated to be over 8 billion people in the world today. That's a lot. Brian is one of only 12 individuals out of those 8 billion who currently holds the Cialdini Method Certified Trainer designation, and he's only one of a handful to have earned the Cialdini Persuasion Trainer designation. So that's pretty impressive in and of itself. But Brian's a dynamic international keynote speaker. He's an author, a coach, a consultant. But he specializes in applying the science of influence in everyday situations. And whether we're talking business, whether we're talking our personal life, we talked a little bit on camera about our personal situation with our spouses. Influence is really an essential element of our life. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say. And with that, I'm going to quit talking and ask you to do that. Give us a brief overview, Brian, of how you got to the point of being one of only 12 people to have this designation.
Okay, well, I was working for an insurance company. That's where I started my career and spent all of my career until I stepped out on my own 4.5 years ago. And I was involved with sales training. And one of my coworkers was taking MBA classes at The Ohio State University, saw a video of Robert Cialdini in a marketing class, and gave the video to my boss and I, and that was about 20 years ago. And as soon as I watched the video, Bill, the light came on. And I knew that the psychology that he was talking about, how to ethically influence people, was the underpinning of all selling. It explained why certain sales approaches work and why certain ones don't. So it really appealed to me for that reason. The second thing was it was all research-based. So I could feel really confident in getting behind it. There was at the time 6 or 7 decades of research in this field. So it wasn't just somebody's good advice. And the third thing that appealed to me was his stance on ethics. He talked about doing this in a non-manipulative way. So I started using the video around the company in different training, and we would talk about the concepts. Well, in the meantime, I signed up for Stanford's marketing. And one day, one of their marketing flyers came across my desk, and it had Cialdini's picture, and at the top in bold letters, bestseller, and right underneath it in bold letters, it said, call it influence, persuasion, or even manipulation. And I just remember thinking, I can't believe a copyright person would actually put that in the headline. I mean, either they're not very good at copyright or they just never watched the video to understand what it was really about. So for whatever reason, that moral part of me decided to address the issue, and I emailed Stanford. And I basically said, I don't know anybody who wants to be manipulated, and I don't know anybody who's looking to become a good manipulator. The word cannot be helping your sales, but it's probably really hurting. Well, I never heard from Stanford, but sometime later my phone rang, and it was a representative of Robert Cialdini's company, Influence at Work, and Chris Cibarelli had called to thank me on his behalf. And she said, your email caused Stanford to change the marketing of our materials. And
outstanding.
And it was so cool. And in the course of that conversation, she said before the end, she goes, if your company is ever looking for a guest speaker, Dr. Cialdini travels the world and speaks about this. I said, I sit next to the woman who plans our events and books our speakers. We want to talk to her. So as fate would have it, it was the summer of 2004, and he was in Columbus several times to speak to the insurance agents that represented the company. And I went through his workshop and ultimately got certified, and the rest is history. But my life, Bill, would be so different if I had not sent that email, because it literally changed the course of my career now that I'm out on my own doing this. But it also changed my life in the that I interact with people so differently based on the things that I've learned about ethical influence. So whether it's my wife, raising our daughter, interacting with everybody, it was a life-changing event for me.
I think that's incredible. And the fact that you took the initiative because you believed in something and you had no stake in it,
Mhm.
and it affected such a big change, ultimately to yourself, but in a direct change to the person who you were looking out for, if you will. I
Mhm.
think that says a lot about the whole approach of being ethical
Yeah.
and being true to ourselves. Is that what you found?
Absolutely. In fact, I relish it when people bring up manipulation and try to say, well, what you're talking about is just manipulation. And I can say, okay, let me tell you a story. If this was manipulation, I wouldn't be standing here. That word is what caused the change in my life, and that's the reason I'm standing here. And then once I get a chance to share that story, I think people can see the conviction that I have, and they're bought in that, like, hey, this guy really believes we can do it the right way. I should pay attention. And then I've got my platform to share how we do that.
So let me take a moment here and ask you to explain, to help me better understand and the listeners better understand. Share with us, please, Brian, how you differentiate influence and manipulation.
Okay. Well, let's start with talking about influence. And I use the words influence and persuasion pretty interchangeably. But when I
Okay.
talk about persuasion, the definition that I use that resonates most with me comes from Aristotle. And Aristotle said that persuasion was the art of getting someone to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do if you didn't ask. And so when you really pause to think about that, somebody is not doing what you want or need them to do. How you communicate with them will make all the difference between yes and no.
Mhm.
So that's what I see persuasion as. Now we can also talk about there's decades of research into various principles about how people think and behave. But when it comes to then doing it ethically, to be an ethical influencer, there's three must-haves. And the first is truthfulness. It's not enough, Bill, that I tell you the truth. I never hide the truth from you either. If there's something that might make a material impact on your decision and I'm withholding it, you won't come back and say Brian was an ethical guy if you find out after the fact. But what I do learn through influence is I can bring up just about anything and put it on the table and quite often gain credibility. Because if I'm going to share a fact that really may work against me or against my objective, and you recognize that, you're probably thinking, hey, he's a pretty upright guy. He didn't
Mhm.
have to share that, and he did. So,
Right.
so we're always telling the truth and we don't hide the truth. The second thing is we only use the psychology or the principles of influence that are natural to the situation that we find ourselves in. So as an example, if something's not scarce, we don't try to claim that it is. We know that people typically want things more when they think they're scarce, but we're not going to invoke a false sense of scarcity, or we're not going to invoke a false sense of social proof that, hey, everybody's doing this when the reality is they aren't. And then the third thing is what we're proposing cannot just be good for you as the person trying to influence. It also has to be good for the other person. And I like to put it this way, Bill, good for you, good for me, then we're good to go. And I think if we can hit all three of those things, we can feel very good about how we're interacting with and trying to influence people.
And so to come back just to dive a little bit deeper, to me, what you just said, first of all, I love all 3 points, and especially the first one about truthfulness, which is not just tell the truth, don't lie through omission.
Mm-hmm.
Or don't mislead through omission. Either way, however you want to look at it, I think that's very, very important, and it does speak to being ethical. But that also starts to speak to the difference between persuasion/influence and manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
because manipulation is going to do everything you just outlined as what you don't do.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite of your 3 points. It's hold things back that can give someone information that would have them decide something other than what you want. So is that fair to say that the easiest way to define manipulation is to look at the opposite of the 3 points you just outlined?
I think you could do that for sure, because when you're trying to manipulate somebody, it's almost always for your benefit. You don't really care. If the other person gets something good, hey, that's okay. But if they don't, you don't care. And so that's where when your self-interest is above the other person's, I think that's where there's a great temptation to potentially lie, withhold information, to use the the principles of influence in a way that's not natural to the situation. But if you have to do that, then I would say you don't have a very good product service, or you don't know how to make your case well. Nothing is perfect. And I think everybody understands that. And so by talking about what some of the downsides are, but also what the upsides are, and then specifically how you go about doing that, you can still have an opportunity to get that other person in agreement and help them at the same time. But if you know you have a crummy product or a crummy service, and so you're lying about it, or you're doing other things that somebody would say, if I had known that before, I never would have made this decision, then you're manipulating people. And nobody wants to feel like they were manipulated into a decision.
100% true. I couldn't agree more. And what you're talking about through Cialdini and his work, and a lot of folks that work influence, regular listeners know that I'm a certified go-giver, coach, and speaker. And one of the things that we talk about, and Bob Berg, who I'm sure you know, talks about, is that the fact that we cannot make a sale. We can only present a situation that would entice someone to make the decision to buy or use the product or the service or whatever is being offered. And that's a key difference, because to me, making a sale is all about me and what I need. And that can very quickly lead to manipulation. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, we typically use the term inform. So we inform people into a decision by understanding how people process information and what principles cause them to respond in certain ways. And so we state our case better than we could have before, but we're really informing them. And when I work with salespeople, at every step in the sales cycle, from prospecting all the way through getting referrals, getting a yes is critical, because you don't move to the next step until you get that yes. And so by using these principles, you can inform people into decisions that make them say, that makes sense. Let's have that first meeting, or that makes sense. I want you to give me a proposal. Hey, it makes total sense. You know, you're helping me. I would love to refer people to you, but you're informing them into that.
And what you've just described again is just the perfect response to those that say you're just manipulating. Because are you engaging principles of psychology? Absolutely. Is there anything wrong with that? Of course not. As long as you hit the points that you talked about and making sure that it's good for both parties.
Absolutely.
I mean, it starts with, are you providing value to the other person? And then, of course, if you're doing that, it's we get what we are meant to get as a result of that. Let me take a slight deviation here, and let me get back to Brian, the individual, and let me hear and let our listeners learn a little bit more about your background and how you ended up. Did you go to the Ohio State University? And I know you've been married for 35 years.
Yes, 35 this month.
Congratulations! A beautiful wife, a beautiful marriage, a beautiful family. That's very cool. But share a little bit about how you got to where you are historically.
Okay. Going all the way back, I was actually born in Hawaii. My father served in the Marines during Vietnam. And when I tell people that, those people who know me, it explains a lot about my self-discipline and a lot of other traits that I have. When I graduated college, I took a job in insurance. Now, I didn't take it because I thought insurance would be a great career. Very few people I know say, I want to grow up and be in insurance. Most people tend to fall into it. But I took this job primarily because my last week of college, I got a letter from the Travelers Insurance Companies. I'd already accepted another job, but I thought I owed it to the girl I'd been dating. I grew up in the Columbus area. And so for that reason, I went to the interview. Liked everything I heard, thought, well, I can stay around her. I've been dating her for a while. My family's here, friends. So I take this job, and the first day of work, I meet my wife. So 2 weeks later, I wasn't going out with the other girl. Jane and I started dating, and a little over a year later, we ended up getting married. My career then progressed with Travelers Insurance Companies, and then to what was State Auto Insurance. They've now been bought by Liberty Mutual, and spent time in the underwriting side, personal lines, commercial lines, moved into sales and really started working with insurance agents, company sales reps. And then my last few years with the insurance company, I ran the corporate university. Things got to a point, the company was changing in very, when I say radical, not like socially, but in terms of how they were doing business,
Right.
it was changing very radically. And I didn't really agree with how things were being done. And so I thought, I'm not going to be a detractor, and I'm not going to come in here and be unhappy just because I've got metrics to hit for retirement and things. And so I left 4.5 years ago. But I had been planning that exit for about 10 years. I knew this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. So when I stepped away, I had something almost fully formed to start working. And it's been a joy. I love what I do. I'm excited every day to get up. And Bill, here's something that you'll probably appreciate from corporate life. I love that nobody ever says, hey, stop what you're doing, set it aside. Here's the new priority. I wake up every day. I determine my priorities. I sink or swim with them, and I'm totally okay with that.
And that's brilliant. You and I both share corporate life in our background, and it sounds like both of us are grateful that it is in the rearview mirror. That said, I know in my case, and it sounds like the very same is true for you, I learned so much from so many bright people, and the experience is hard to replicate in any other way than having gone through it. So in that regard, I'm very lucky and I feel very blessed to have gone through what I've gone through, but I also got to the point of realizing it wasn't where I needed to continue to be.
Yeah. I had people who would ask me, are you bothered that you didn't leave sooner? And I said no, because up until the point when I make the decision, I loved what I was doing, who I was working for. I was well paid. I enjoyed all the people that I was working with when I would travel and interact with people. But things pretty quickly started changing. And the timing for me was perfect. If I had gone sooner, there was too much to learn still. If I had waited longer, COVID hit, I don't know that I would have had the courage to step out, because once COVID hit, I was already doing this. I had to figure it out, and I was able to do that. But so I look at it and say the timing was just right.
Yeah, and the other thing too, in my experience, is we have to go through what we went through to become who we are. So to look back with regret is fine, I guess, but in reality, we have to look back and say, here's what I've learned from where I've been, even though some of it got a little rocky, perhaps. So I think that's great. So I asked you earlier about the Ohio State University, just because I always get a smile when I have to say the Ohio State, but you're a graduate of Miami University and
Correct.
graduated with honors, if I'm not mistaken.
I was a cum laude graduate, and I loved my time down at Miami. It was everything I envisioned college to be.
I have never been to Miami University in Ohio. I've put my foot on the one down in Florida, but I just have to say this because I know a lot of people, in particular in my background through Anheuser-Busch, that spent their undergraduate work at Miami University, and I've never heard one person say a bad thing about that school or the experience they had there. So that's anyone listening, if you or if you have kids thinking about university, just an unsolicited comment, consider Miami University based on just what I hear.
Yeah. It was a beautiful, stunningly beautiful campus, and the education was tremendous, and it had a college life. People stayed there on the weekends. They weren't dispersing around, and it was what I thought college would be like when I went.
Excellent. So just out of curiosity, what did you graduate? What was your degree in?
I was a general business major because when I went to school, I was so into weightlifting, and I got involved in powerlifting. After college, I was in bodybuilding, and I thought I wanted to own a gym. And so I thought the best route for me to go would be general business, learn a lot about everything, also take courses on physiology, kinesiology, things like that. While I was there, I ran the weightlifting club for 3 years, and it was a big club. We had several hundred members. So I felt like I was getting all the experience that I was needing to own my own gym. Now, the interesting thing is, Bill, at some point I let go of that dream. There was never a day where I just woke up and said, I'm not going to do that. But all of a sudden, it wasn't really a dream anymore. But here's the cool thing. I realized, and in fact, I have a blog post coming up about this. I realized that I actually fulfilled my dream because I do own a gym. It's in my basement, and it's a really nice gym. And it just made me think sometimes we fulfill our dreams But because it's not how we envision them, we don't realize it, even though we're in the middle of it. And I would really encourage people to sometimes step back and like look at their life and what they were thinking about, how their life would unfold. You may find yourself in the middle of something that you are so grateful for, but you didn't recognize it because of how you envisioned it might happen.
And that's very profound. So everyone, today my guest, I'm speaking with Brian Ahearn, who's the Chief Influence Officer at Influence People. And what you just brought up, Brian, is a great segue for me to talk about purpose and finding our purpose. So what you just talked about, I've historically used an example of people that just absolutely love golf and believe that what they want to do is become a professional golfer. And I know a few who had that dream, and it didn't work out. So having the ability to take that core interest and then find out how you really want to channel that into a purpose for yourself is what ignites our passion. So you just talked about, I mean, in particular, one friend from years ago who attempted golf, he said, I could beat every player on the tour in practice rounds. When we got on the course, I couldn't. And he became a club pro. And then he became a salesman in our group at Anheuser-Busch. So what you talked about just now is having this vision of owning a gym. That kind of manifested itself, right? And what was driving you for with that?
Well, I loved training with weights from the time I was in high school. My body took to it, and so it became a big part of my identity. When we moved into our home, I was still going to a gym, and then my wife said, we should buy some stuff for the house. So I got the green light, and I just continued to add to what I had. Now, at this point in life, I don't want to spend time getting ready, getting in the car, driving to the gym, then having to do that. I can do a lot with that 30 to 45 minutes. So I love the fact that I can just walk right down to my basement. Self-motivation is not a problem. I can walk in my basement. It's a really nice gym and it's a nice setup. I can do what I need to do, and then I can be back upstairs doing whatever else I need to do. So I love that about it. And in addition to that, I got involved with running. I ran marathons, and so I've got a treadmill. So I can be outside doing what I love, or I can be inside doing what I love, but I can do it every day, something I've loved since I was a teenager.
And yes, I mean your purpose was fitness, right? Your purpose was appreciating how you responded physically to the workout that you did, and that became a part of your life, and incorporated into your life. It is interesting to hear that you were a power lifter and then a marathoner, because those two typically don't seem to fit very well together.
Right, they're oil and water.
How did that work?
Well, it was about a decade after I had stopped competing, and a friend who's a fitness trainer here in town convinced a number of us we could run the Columbus Marathon. And at first I didn't want anything to do with it, but my wife encouraged me because she started running too. And I fell in love with it. I loved how I felt when I got done with a run. And the thing that I also appreciated, Bill, was it satisfied that competitive itch that I had. I knew that when I left weightlifting behind, I would never be that big, that strong again. But here was something new. And so it's like every time I went out and ran, I was running a little further, a little faster. And I ended up running not just the Columbus Marathon, but half a dozen. And I found out I was pretty good. I qualified for Boston. I ran Boston a couple of times. So it was just a great endeavor for me to channel that discipline, the physicalness of it, the having that goal out in front of me that I could be chasing down. So like weights, it met all those requirements. It was just a different activity.
Okay, and that sounds great. So again, you had the purpose of fitness, and you just shifted how you approach that, which I think is great. Let me move back to your professional life. You're an author. Tell us about your book, which is Influence People. Let me give the full title: Influence People: Powerful Everyday Opportunities to Persuade that are Lasting and Ethical.
Okay.
An Amazon bestseller, I believe.
Yep. Well, it's interesting, Bill, that the word people in my company, Influence People, it is the acronym, right? Powerful, everyday opportunities, persuade, lasting, and ethical. That came to me one day out of the blue. I don't know how. I wasn't trying to think of something, but I thought, this is beautiful. It fits perfectly with what I do. So the book that I wrote, I started it many years before I left my corporate job. But as you know, when you're in a corporate role and you've got your 40 plus hours, plus I had a lot of travel with the training I was doing, it just was hard to keep up with blogging every single week, doing my job and working on this book. So I set it on the back burner for quite a while. But when I left my corporate job in November of 2018, I said, this has to be my number one priority. Finish the book. The credibility, the opportunity to sell it at conferences and all the things that come along with it. So I worked with a book coach. I got that done. And the book really, it introduces the what we call principles of influence and other human decision-making traits. And then it looks at things like business case studies, real-world business examples, how to use it in social media, how to use it with your personal life. So it takes a broad look, and I call it a business psychology book. But anybody who wants to understand the practical application of Robert Cialdini's work, they'd want to pick up my book, Influence People.
Okay, and one thing that makes an author, I believe, from the person who's published one book is to truly be an author, I think you have to keep going. And your second book is, again, more focused on your personal background, and it's Persuasive Selling for Relationship-Driven Insurance Agents. Tell us a little bit about that one, please.
Well, since I'd always been involved with sales, I thought I should write a book on how to incorporate persuasion into selling. And when I first started the book, I was trying to make it appeal to too many people, and I felt like it was getting watered down. And on the advice of my longtime boss and close friend, he said, just go back to what you know. Go back to insurance. The market is huge there. So I honed everything in to specifically, how can I help insurance agents help their clients more? Most people are underinsured. They don't have the right coverages and things. And so their ability to have those conversations is critical for people. So the book looks at the sales cycle, starting with referrals all the way, or from prospecting all the way through referrals, what psychology is best and why. It looks at different buying personalities and what psychology you want to utilize. It has a section on listening skills and what you can do to become listening stars. And it introduces a concept called persuasion. How do you set the stage before you even try to influence somebody that might put them in the right mindset and make it easier? So there's a wealth of information in there. And I also use that as the basis of a one-day workshop that I do with insurance agents.
Okay. And it's really interesting that you were counseled to narrow it down to a singular field, and your background in particular. Not having read the book, to be perfectly honest with you, I assume that it would translate very easily to other professions, and I think real estate, I think perhaps financial advisors, any industry where there's a need, where people aren't all that educated, and also are often inundated with approaches where people are trying to make a sale and or manipulate. I would think that anyone, and this is again for my listeners as much as anything else. Tell me if I'm off base, but I would think anyone can pick up the book, even though it says insurance agents, and glean from that approaches that they can put into their industry, even if it's not insurance.
Yeah, 100%, because all of those people are going to have to prospect. They're going to have initial meetings. They're going to qualify. They're going to present objections and so on. So the examples that I give do relate to insurance, but the psychology would still be the same. When I talk about the different buying styles, people are going to encounter that. So the psychology will still be the same, but the examples I use are insurance related because that's the field. Listening skills, it's the same thing. So you're 100% right, Bill. Anybody who would read that would be able to say, okay, I see how I can apply this to what I do. I have a section on real world situations that come up. For example, in insurance, a lot of times people say, well, I can't say I've got 15 years of experience. I'm new. How do I handle that? That happens to financial advisors. That happens to other people too. So they'll be able to relate to all of it.
Yeah, exactly. And so one thought I have is, have you ever considered co-authoring with someone whose background is specific, a different industry like real estate, where you take your approach and they can kind of fill in the blanks more specific? And that's just a thought. So What
It
do you
is
think?
something, yeah, it is something that I have thought about before, not specifically, for example, with real estate, but
Right, right, right.
I might focus on that one first because my son-in-law just got his real estate license, so
Uh-huh.
it could be
Okay.
especially helpful for him. But right now, Bill, I've got another project that I'm working on that's going to probably take some time. And I wrote a book about my relationship with my father, who I mentioned served in the Marines. And there's some really positive things about that, and there can be really negative things.
Hmm.
So the book is about our relationship, and his untimely passing 2.5 years ago. And I'm actually working through a publishing house on this one. So I have a feeling it's going to take some time. I've got the core of the book completed, but I need to do a lot of work in terms of how it's going to be laid out. So that's number one project for this year.
Now, so I know that you have another book in the works, if not finished, and help me understand if this is the one that is the story of your father or not. The Influencer: Secrets to Success and Happiness, or is that yet? Is that a fourth book?
Oh, that was actually my third book. So that one's already
Right.
out. And
Yeah.
that book is a business parable, kind of follows the
Okay.
life of a young man, and you see how he learns about influence from coaches, mentors, bosses, people like that, and how he integrates it into not only his work, but his personal life too. So that was my first attempt at writing a story. But the book about my father, that one is kind of in the works still.
Okay. And when I said fourth book, I didn't mean chronologically. I just wanted to make sure that I had differentiated the one that you just talked about your father, because I hadn't heard about that prior to it, and I just wanted to make sure I wasn't confusing it with the influencer, because clearly your father was an influencer to you. So I actually am intrigued at what the story of your experience and your insights from your father is going to be, because I think that could be very powerful.
My number one goal in writing the book, Bill, is that hopefully Marines will read it, or maybe anybody in the armed forces, and maybe learn from some of the mistakes that my dad made, and make better decisions. That maybe the families of those Marines and others would read it and have more empathy and understanding, and that ultimately, if it can bring people closer together, then it's all worth writing the book. I think it will appeal to a wider audience, because of the dynamic of father and son. But that's the heart of what I'm trying to accomplish with the book.
I'm wondering, you talked about his untimely passing and just the influence of being the son of someone who experienced Vietnam. Now, I'm closer to Vietnam service timing in my life, but I didn't go. I mean, I was right as they found out that we don't have to send more people over there, thank God. But I'm just wondering, do you find that this process is a little bit cathartic for you as an individual as well?
Oh, 100%. Because it made me go back and think about things that I hadn't thought deeply about for a while. And, the person who was editing the book made a comment at one point. She goes, your dad, when he was married to your mom, was a shit husband. Pardon my French. That's what she said. And then she said, but it really seems like he was trying to be a good dad. And as I looked at things that he was doing, even when they were separated, like taking me to my first college football game, he took me to a USC Notre Dame game, or in the Coliseum, and certain things like that, as an 8, 9 year old was just huge. And so it really made me go back and look at those things, and it made me appreciate so much more many of the qualities that I have that I know are directly from him and how he was trying to raise me. I felt like even though he made a lot of mistakes, he was very much about do the right thing and treat people the right way, and be honorable. Maybe it was a little bit of him trying to make up for some of his shortcomings, but my wife, when she met me, she said, "You're like a Boy Scout." You're like, I was never in the Boy Scouts, but just compared to other people she had known or dated, in terms of how I viewed the world and how I treated people. And so that's a big compliment to him, and my mom as well.
It's also I just want to say congratulations to you for having what I'm going to term the courage to go back and look at that on such a deep personal level. That takes some fortitude, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's our memories fade a little bit as we get older. But what's
Yes, they
interesting,
do.
Bill, was during the most tumultuous time, like when my parents had a fight, And I remember the screaming and yelling and hearing things breaking. Well, I had to keep a journal that year when I was a sophomore in high school. I have the actual words I wrote the day after about my recollection of what happened. I have my actual words about the day that my dad moved out and how I thought it was going to impact me as a 15-year-old and my discipline and my grades. And so the book has some really unique things about, it's not just my memory, it's here's what actually was written moments after some of these things happened. The other thing that's interesting too is my dad had written about a 40-page document, why he went into the Corps, who he met, his time in Vietnam, etc. And it was because he had started reflecting on life, and he gave it to me and said, maybe this will help you understand me. Maybe it'll raise more questions. So that's a big portion of the book too, his own words about what had gone on with him or how he viewed his parents and his father who was alcoholic. So I think it's got the potential to be really, really powerful if we can get it set up the right way so people get hooked and they want to keep reading.
Well, just a little bit I know of you, I think I'm comfortable in saying that you can change that word if we get it and to when you get it set up correctly, because I believe that you will. And in particular, I believe that from what I know of you, but also just on what you've said, is going to take a while. Mm-hmm. And what that tells me is you're very committed to making sure this is accurate and meaningful and insightful and of interest to the other person, to the potential reader. So are you going to benefit from what you're doing? I would say 100%. Mm-hmm. But when you're looking at it as, not only can this help me, but boy, how many families, how many ex-Marines, or there's never an ex-Marine, how many Marines, how many military family and those who were in the military can benefit from this. That's how I'm positive this is going to be. I look forward to getting a copy of that whenever it comes out.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I get a little welled up when I say this, but the best thing that could happen with that book is if somebody comes back and says, thank you for writing it.
Yeah. Well, do you have even a general time frame on that? Just, I know you're not rushing it, but I'm just wondering, when you're working with publishers, they tend to say you have a deadline.
Yeah. At this point, most the writing is really done. And I'm talking to a publisher, and what they came back and said was, there's a lot of powerful things in the book, but we need to get it laid out the right way in more of a story format rather than just an A to Z chronology. And so I'm interviewing what are called developmental editors, people who can help me figure out how to maybe break up things and intersperse them rather than just this timeline. My goal would be before the end of the year. But I'm not putting a hard stop on it because it's not like I have to get this out. It's not like I need the income from the book or anything. I want it to be right. And if it takes a little bit longer to make it right, I'm totally okay with that. Excellent.
Let's move on a little bit, Brian. And let me ask you about your speaking engagements, where you look to speak, what is an ideal situation for you to speak, and that's both for my own edification, but also for our listeners, because I'm going to believe that some of the listeners are going to think, boy, this guy's got something that my company and I myself needs to hear.
So my speaking, I typically, when I'm a one-man shop here, when I stepped out on my own, I focus on the insurance industry primarily. It's where I spent my career. I understand it inside and out. I understand how I can take influence and give them application points that they can leave today and start putting into practice. I have a lot of clients and speaking engagements outside of insurance, and a lot of times it's because they find me. They might have read Cialdini's book and they find me on LinkedIn and they want somebody like me to come in and talk about practical application. I think the reality is any organization that recognizes getting people to say yes is critical for their success would benefit from what I talk about. Salespeople always get that. They know that they need to get a yes to close the sale. But managers, they need to get yeses so that their good ideas can help the company move forward. And leaders need to get yeses for people to buy into the mission, vision, and values. So people who really recognize this is going to be fundamental to our success would appreciate what I have to share and would benefit from it.
And I'm glad to hear you say that it goes well beyond the insurance industry, because just coincidental timing. I was with a client yesterday and we were talking about in his business, he tries to help people find where they want to be and then where they fit, as opposed to just kind of channeling people. You go do this. And we were talking about one of his employees who wants to become arguably, I'll just say the position is chief of staff. And part of what we discussed was whether or not she has, his words, not mine, the chops to have the influence in that role. So, I mean, in speaking with you this morning, I went back to my, just 24 hours ago, thinking about this. This is valid and important to people regardless of industry, and is frankly also very viable and relatable to those in our personal life.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I talk about professional success and personal happiness. Everybody gets it pretty much when they're at work. But when you think about going home and how often you might be asking your spouse to do something or interacting with your kids, if you can get those people to say yes with less resistance, that tends to lead to peace and happiness in the household. How you deal with your neighbors. If you have an issue with a neighbor over something, rather than just going in and trying to strong arm them, but understanding how people think and behave and how you could communicate with them, it can make your life so much better outside of work, as well as having the success at work.
Yeah, and importantly, with the basis of the approach being, let's look at how this is good from all sides, as opposed to let me get my way. I've tried that in professional and personal situations before, and it can get real ugly real quickly. And unfortunately, guilty as charged. But also, like I said, we learn from that. And so if we do that kind of thing and we can learn from it and say there's a different way and a better way, then good for all of us and good for everyone we encounter. So I'm just curious. Help me understand. It strikes me again that your book, your third book, The Influencer Secrets to Success and Happiness, might be the type of book that I could suggest to this young lady who works for my client. I
think that would be a really good starting point, because she would see how somebody is learning about influence throughout their career. And this person progresses as a medical supply salesperson into a managerial role, into leadership roles. And so she might be able to really relate to that career path, but also what he gleans from these people who are around him.
Yeah, that's really important. And I love the fact that it's story-based. I'm sure you're familiar with, 4 of the 5 Go Giver books are story-based. Only one is based in what I'll call a case study. And it just tends to work. It tends to work for me anyway, and it tends to work for millions based on sales of the Go Giver series of books. So we've talked a lot, Brian, about influence. We've talked a lot about what influence is and what manipulation is, and the pros of one and the cons of the other. What would be your one comment to people when it comes to that? Because, and here's what I'm trying to get at, and I wish I could get it out quicker. Especially in corporate world, a lot of people are pressured. You need to hit this goal, this sales goal, and it's really easy when that pressure is coming to let go of our standards, to let go of our ethical approach. What do you suggest to people in that situation to get through those pressure points?
Yeah. So anybody going into a corporate role has to expect that there's going to be some amount of that. There's, certain companies, there's going to be more, but I would look at it like this. If somebody wanted to get in shape because let's say they have a 25 reunion or there's a big family wedding coming up, you don't wait till 2 weeks before and crash diet. You say, I know this is coming, and therefore what can I start doing today and what can I do each day to help me get to that point so I feel and look the way I want to on that big event? I think when it comes to corporations setting goals, as soon as you understand what those are, what is the groundwork I can begin to lay today? Because I don't want to be frantic in the fourth quarter to try to hit these goals. Now, I might still be somewhat frantic, even if I do a really good job here, but I'll be less frantic if I have started investing in, building relationships with the vendors or with the clients that I'm dealing with. And I'm doing all of these things that when it gets to the point of trying to close the sale, it's much easier. And it's not a high pressure tactic where they're resisting on that. So that's what my advice would be. Think about the parallels of those events and how, unfortunately, too often people try to do these crash fitness or diet for a very short period of time, and they need to be doing it as a lifestyle. You need to be understanding that influence is something that you're doing every day, and you're always setting up that next moment.
That's a key point, and in my experience, myself included, I think human tendency is to, more often than not, kind of put it off to the last minute. Have that crash diet, look for that magic pill, look for that quick fix as opposed to the ongoing discipline. So I think that's a really key point to bring into account for making ethical influence at the core, at one of our core values at a personal level, so that we can bring it to bear in every situation. Yeah. I think that's powerful.
Bill, one thing that I tell people all the time of all the principles that we talk about, there's a principle of liking. And everybody listening is going to get this. We prefer to do business with people that we know and like. We prefer to say yes to people that we know and like. We all get that. The problem that most people go through is they work so hard to get the other person to like them. And that's not what it's about. It's about you doing what you can to like that person. Because once they start to sense that, like for example, Bill, if you said, wow, I can sense Brian really likes me. Brian really cares about me. That understanding is what starts opening you up to what I might offer. And because I've come to know and like you, I do want what's best for you. Mm-hmm. So we've got this virtuous cycle now where you know that I'm looking out for you. I am looking out for you. So you respond to me differently than you might respond to other salespeople. And it's not that you'll say yes every time, but you'll probably say yes far more often because I'm working hard for you and you recognize that. Once you do that, manipulation is all but removed. Because I won't manipulate my friends, Bill. I know you won't manipulate your friends. Your listeners are not going to manipulate their friends. So go make friends of the people that you work with, the clients you serve, the vendors that you interact with. And you'll be amazed, one, at how much more you enjoy what you do, but also how much more you can accomplish.
Yeah, and again, powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Brian. And I know we're starting to get close to our time deadline, and I don't want to keep you past what you've committed to. Thank you for the time you've given. But just to build on what you just said, one of the tenets that is in the world of the go-giver, that if you ever hear Bob Burg, he'll say it a lot, and that is, all things being equal, people will do business with people that they know, like, and trust.
Right.
And that's where your ethical influence versus manipulation comes into play. One final thing. I heard recently, and I wish I could remember where I heard it to give proper credit, but someone said, keep in mind that everyone in the world has a sign on them, and the sign is the same for everyone. And the sign that we all have says, make me feel important. Mm-hmm. And if we can do that from a genuine basis of caring about people as humans, as opposed to, I'll make them feel good so I can take advantage of them, that to me supports what you had just said about, people, the whole liking principle. Mm-hmm. It's time for I only have one prepared question ever for all of my guests, and we're at that point now. So given everything we've talked about, given your life experience and your work and the books you've published, when it all comes together, when you take a look at it, what's the point, Brian?
For me, the point, you talked about mission earlier, and I wrote a mission statement more than 30 years ago after I read Covey's book and the chapter Begin with the End in Mind. And the ultimate point for me is that when I die, God says, well done. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things, put you in charge of many things. And I feel like I can fulfill that by what I do with influence, by helping people ethically influence others and enjoy the success that comes with that, or the happiness that comes with that at home, I think God will look down and go, well done.
Terrific. Same as the entire almost 50 minutes here of conversation. Thank you so much for your insights, for your wisdom, for sharing that. As regular listeners know, if you want to get in touch with Brian, go to influencepeople.biz, but all of his contact information, how to find his books, all of his social, everything is in the show notes. Get in touch with him, bring him in to speak at your organization, whether you're in insurance or not, because influence will help you. Brian, again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure, Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.